What if the oldest civilization on Earth isn't lost beneath jungles or oceans, but buried in plain sight beneath the sands of Arabia? They say the desert forgets, that wind and time erase everything. But what if that isn't true? What if the stones beneath the dunes are not ruins of random age, but fragments of a forgotten blueprint? A network of monuments built thousands of years before the first pyramid rose along the Nile. Across the Arabian Peninsula, satellite scans have revealed shapes no one can explain. Rectangles longer than city blocks, walls stretching for kilometers, and geometric patterns that seem designed to be seen from the sky. Who built them, when no cities yet existed? How did Stone Age people organize projects on this scale? And what were they looking at, or for, when they aligned their monuments with invisible points on the horizon? Were these hunting grounds, ritual spaces, or something built to remember a world before the desert became desert? From the cattle sacrifices hidden inside mustatils, to the vast kites that trap nothing, to the silent inscriptions carved long before writing, each discovery deepens the mystery. The farther we search, the less we understand. So tonight, as we journey into the heart of the empty quarter, we follow the trail of the explorer of the erased epics to uncover what the desert still remembers and what humanity has tried for millennia to forget. The helicopter banked low over the basalt plains, and that's when I saw them, lines, thousands of them, carved into the desert floor like veins of some sleeping giant. From the ground, they're invisible. From above, they're undeniable. Stone walls stretching for kilometers, geometric patterns older than the pyramids, built by people who supposedly didn't exist. The archaeologists told me these structures predate any known Arabian civilization. But as I descended into the Herat Kebar lava fields, one question burned hotter than the midday sun. If no civilization built these, then who did? I'd been chasing rumors for months. Bedouin guides spoke of ancient walls in the desert, patterns that only birds could see. Satellite archaeologists published papers with careful language, words like anomalous and unexplained. But nothing prepared me for the moment the pilot tapped my shoulder and pointed down. Below us, the Kebar volcanic plateau spread out in waves of black and rust, and scored across its surface were structures that defied every assumption I'd carried into Arabia. They call this region the Herat, a volcanic field that erupted thousands of years ago, leaving behind a moonscape of hardened lava and shattered rock. It's one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. Summer temperatures reach 50 degrees Celsius. Water is scarce. Nothing grows here except thorny shrubs that cling to life in the cracks. And yet, someone chose this exact landscape to build monuments on a scale that staggers the mind. The first structure we circled was a kite, though that name feels inadequate for what I was seeing. Two stone walls converged in a perfect funnel shape, spanning nearly 3 kilometers from opening to tip. At the narrow end sat a circular enclosure, walls stacked waist-high from thousands of individual rocks. The precision was unsettling. These weren't random piles. Every stone had been placed deliberately, creating barriers that followed the contours of the land while maintaining geometric integrity. From the air, it looked like a vast trap, something designed to channel animals toward an inescapable end. But here's what troubled me immediately. The opening faced east, directly into the rising sun. Any herd moving through this landscape would travel north to south, following ancient water sources and seasonal migrations. This kite pointed the wrong way. It would catch nothing. I made a note in my field journal circling the word orientation 3 times. The pilot flew lower, following a chain of similar structures that marched across the plateau like footprints of something immense. I counted 12 kites in a single 15-kilometer stretch, each one precisely positioned, each one connected by faint trails visible only from altitude, and between them, scattered like seeds, were other shapes: long rectangles, perfect circles, parallel walls that ran straight as laser beams across terrain that should have made straight lines impossible. I pressed my forehead against the helicopter window, feeling the glass vibrate with rotor wash, and tried to comprehend the labor this represented. Moving 1 ton of volcanic rock in this heat would exhaust a person. These structures contained thousands of tons, tens of thousands, and they stretched as far as I could see in every direction, vanishing into heat shimmer and distance. Whoever built this didn't just visit the Herat, they transformed it. But the question that followed me down, that whispered in my ear as we landed on a flat expanse of cracked basalt, was simpler and more disturbing. Why has no one heard of them? I knelt beside a wall made of volcanic rock, its edges weathered by winds that have blown for 10,000 years. They call them desert kites, massive stone funnels that stretch across the landscape, narrowing into kill pits where ancient hunters supposedly drove herds to their death. But here's what doesn't make sense. Many of these kites face the wrong direction. Some have walls too low to contain anything. Others sit in areas where no herds ever migrated. I traced one with my finger on the satellite map. It was 65 kilometers long. What kind of hunt requires a trap the size of a small country? The heat was brutal that first day on foot. I had left the helicopter behind to examine a kite cluster the surveys had flagged as unusual. The walls rose about half a meter high, constructed from fist-sized chunks of basalt stacked without mortar. Time and erosion had collapsed sections, but the overall shape remained clear. 2 arms extended outward like an open embrace, each one stretching over a kilometer before converging at a stone corral. The engineering was sophisticated. Whoever built this understood terrain, sight lines, and animal behavior. Except the behavior part didn't add up. I walked the entire length of the northern arm, GPS unit in hand, plotting coordinates and trying to imagine the hunt these walls were meant to facilitate. Traditional interpretation says ancient people used these structures to funnel gazelle, ibex, or wild cattle toward the narrow end, where hunters waited to make their kill. It's a reasonable theory. Similar hunting structures exist in other parts of the world, but this kite had problems. First, the opening faced a ridge. Any animals approaching from that direction would see the walls and simply move around them. There was no natural barrier forcing them toward the funnel. Second, the walls were too low. A frightened gazelle clears obstacles twice this height without breaking stride. Third, and this bothered me most, the kill pit at the end sat on an incline. Animals instinctively avoid running downhill into enclosed spaces. They would have balked long before reaching the trap. I sat on one of the wall stones and pulled out my research notes. Archaeologists have documented over 7,000 desert kites across the Middle East, concentrated in Jordan, Syria, and Saudi Arabia. Most date between 9,000 and 5,000 years ago, placing them in the Neolithic period when humans were just beginning to develop agriculture. The standard narrative presents them as evidence of sophisticated hunting practices, proof that prehistoric people could organize labor and engineer large-scale projects. But the more kites I studied, the more exceptions I found. Some had multiple enclosures branching off the main funnel, as if designed to separate herds rather than contain them. Others featured walls that ran parallel for kilometers without ever converging, creating corridors that led nowhere. A few had openings so wide that no reasonable number of hunters could have blocked them. And then there were the kites like this one, positioned in locations that made no ecological sense for intercepting game. I ran my hand along the sun-warmed stone and considered an uncomfortable possibility. What if hunting was never the primary purpose? What if these structures served functions we haven't identified because we're asking the wrong questions? The archaeologists see traps because that's what their framework allows. But standing here, surrounded by walls that trap nothing, I started to wonder what else these lines across the desert might have been designed to capture. And why so many of them point toward the same empty horizon? The sun was setting when I reached my first mustatil, a long rectangular structure stretching nearly half a kilometer into the emptiness. Two thick stone walls running parallel, capped by rounded platforms at each end. No roof, no rooms, no obvious purpose. Archaeologists have found over 1,600 of these across Saudi Arabia, all built between 7,000 and 8,000 years ago. Inside some, they discovered cattle bones and gazelle horns arranged in careful patterns. Ritual sites, they say, but I stood in the center of one and felt something else. Orientation. These structures don't just sit on the land, they point to something. The word mustatil comes from Arabic, meaning rectangle. It's a practical name for a deeply impractical structure. The walls averaged about 1 meter in height, built from the same volcanic stone as the kites, but the construction technique was different, more deliberate, more refined. Each rock had been selected for size and shape, fitted together in courses that showed an understanding of stability and permanence. This wasn't a temporary hunting blind. This was architecture meant to endure. I walked the length of the southern wall as the sky turned copper and gold. 482 meters, according to my rangefinder. The wall ran perfectly straight despite the uneven terrain, maintaining its alignment with an accuracy that seemed impossible for Stone Age builders working without surveying equipment. At the eastern end, a platform rose slightly higher than the rest of the structure, a thick concentration of stones forming a rough circle about 3 meters across. Between these platforms, the interior space lay open to the sky. Sand had drifted in over millennia, but I could still make out traces of the original floor. Compacted earth, darker than the surrounding desert. I knelt and brushed away the surface layer, revealing small fragments of charcoal and bone. Someone had lit fires here. Someone had brought offerings. The question was why they needed a 400-meter-long monument to do it. Recent excavations have revealed fascinating details. Inside several mustatils, archaeologists found concentrations of animal remains, particularly cattle skulls and horn cores. The bones showed no butchery marks, no evidence of consumption. They'd been deposited whole, arranged in specific patterns, sometimes painted with red ochre. One site contained over 30 cattle skulls aligned in rows, facing the same direction. Another held gazelle horns stacked in a pyramid formation. These weren't garbage pits, they were ceremonial deposits. But here's what makes the story strange. Cattle are not desert animals. They require substantial water and grazing land. 8,000 years ago, Arabia was more humid than today, but even then, this region was marginal for cattle herding. Keeping enough livestock to sacrifice 30 at a single site would have required enormous resources. So why were these people investing such wealth in monuments built far from any settlements, far from water sources, far from anywhere humans would naturally congregate? I climbed onto the eastern platform as darkness gathered. From this elevated position, I could see across the plateau to a line of distant mountains, barely visible in the fading light. I pulled out my compass and took a bearing. The mustatil's long axis pointed directly toward those peaks, aligned with a precision that couldn't be accidental. I checked my maps. The mountains lay 70 kilometers away, beyond the edge of any logical territory these builders would have controlled. Yet they'd aimed their monuments straight at them, as if the distant ridgeline held answers we've long forgotten to seek. I spent 3 days mapping mustatils with a compass and GPS. The data unsettled me. 70% of them share a common alignment northeast to southwest, angled towards specific points on the horizon. Some researchers whisper about astronomical orientation, but no one can prove what stars or events they tracked. I checked the archaeoastronomy databases. The angles don't match solstices or equinoxes. They don't align with known constellations from that era. So what were these ancient people watching? And why did they need hundreds of stone monuments to do it? The pattern emerged slowly, like a photograph developing in chemical bath. At first, I thought the alignments were coincidental. Ancient builders often oriented structures toward prominent landscape features, mountains or rock formations that held cultural significance. But as I plotted more coordinates, the coincidences multiplied beyond probability. Mustatils separated by hundreds of kilometers shared identical bearings. Structures built in different centuries pointed to the same invisible targets. This wasn't random, this was systematic. I focused on a cluster of 23 mustatils in the Khaibar region, all within a 50-kilometer radius. Using satellite imagery and ground surveys, I mapped each structure's orientation with precision equipment borrowed from a geology team. 19 of the 23 aligned within 3 degrees of each other, pointing 47 degrees northeast. The consistency was remarkable given the crude tools available to Neolithic builders. Achieving this accuracy across such distances required either sophisticated surveying techniques or a very clear celestial reference point. But when I calculated the sky as it would have appeared 8,000 years ago, accounting for precession and stellar drift, I found nothing significant at that bearing. No bright star marked the position. No planetary conjunction would have occurred there regularly. The spring equinox sunrise came close, off by about 5 degrees, but not close enough to explain the precision. I contacted an archaeoastronomer in London who specialized in prehistoric monuments. She ran her own calculations and sent back a single-line reply. Anomalous orientation, no known celestial correlation. The implication troubled me. If these structures weren't aligned to astronomical events, then what were they pointing at? I returned to the maps, this time extending the bearing lines beyond the immediate horizon. Most disappeared into empty desert, terminating in regions where no archaeological work has been conducted. But 3 lines converged on a specific area in the Nephud Desert, a vast sea of sand dunes where surface archaeology is nearly impossible. Anything buried there would be hidden under meters of shifting sand, invisible to surveys, inaccessible to excavation. I marked the convergence point and felt a chill despite the afternoon heat. Ancient peoples don't build hundreds of monuments pointing to nothing. Alignment implies intention. Intention implies knowledge. And knowledge implies something existed at those coordinates that mattered enough to commemorate in stone across an entire region. The academic papers I reviewed later never mentioned this convergence. They discussed individual mustatils, their construction techniques, their possible ritual functions. But no one had stepped back far enough to see the network, to recognize that these weren't isolated structures, but components of a larger system. A system designed to mark specific locations with permanent, highly visible monuments that would survive millennia of erosion and climate change. I packed my equipment as the sun touched the horizon, casting long shadows from the mustatil walls. Tomorrow I would plot more structures, extend more bearing lines, search for more convergence points. Because somewhere in this desert, buried beneath sand and time, lay the answer to what these ancient builders were trying so desperately to preserve. And someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure we could find it. Deep in the Nafud Desert, excavations revealed something strange inside a mustatil. Cattle skulls, deliberately placed, some painted with ochre. But here's the problem. This region was already turning arid 8,000 years ago. Cattle don't thrive in deserts. So why were these people sacrificing precious livestock in the middle of nowhere? I found records of similar deposits, horns arranged in circular patterns, always in the same position within the structure. It wasn't random, it was systematic. A language written in bone spoken to forces we've long forgotten. The discovery happened during a joint Saudi and French expedition in 2021. Archaeologists excavating a mustatil near the town of Tema found a concentration of animal remains within the eastern platform. 34 cattle skulls, arranged in 3 concentric circles, all facing inward toward a central point. The bones had been stripped of flesh before burial and painted with red ochre in geometric patterns. Between the skulls lay fragments of gazelle horns, ibex teeth, and what appeared to be ostrich eggshell beads. What struck me about the photographs wasn't just the quantity of remains, but the care taken in their arrangement. Each skull occupied a specific position. Each horn core pointed at a precise angle. This wasn't disposal of hunting waste. This was choreography. Someone had invested significant time and effort creating a tableau that held meaning we can only guess at now. But the economic implications bothered me more than the symbolism. Cattle represented enormous wealth in Neolithic societies. A single cow could feed a family for weeks, provide milk for months, produce offspring that multiplied that value. Sacrificing 34 cattle in one ceremony would have devastated a small community's food security. Yet the practice wasn't isolated to this single site. Excavations at other mustatils have revealed similar deposits. One structure contained 47 cattle skulls. Another held the remains of over 60 animals. I tried to calculate the resources required. Each cow needs roughly 15 liters of water daily and substantial grazing land. In the increasingly arid conditions of 8th millennium Arabia, maintaining a herd large enough to sacrifice dozens of animals would have demanded access to permanent water sources and extensive pastures. The nearest reliable water to most mustatil sites lies tens of kilometers away. The structures themselves sit in marginal zones, areas where grazing would have been sparse even during wetter periods. So these people were transporting cattle across difficult terrain to remote locations for the express purpose of ritual sacrifice. The logistics alone suggest a level of social organization we don't usually associate with Neolithic pastoralists. Someone had to coordinate the gatherings, manage the herds during transport, organize the ceremonies, and ensure enough animals remained to sustain the breeding population. This wasn't spontaneous religious expression. This was institutionalized practice repeated across centuries, maintained by communities who considered the investment worthwhile despite its cost. But worthwhile for what? The archaeologists use careful language in their publications. They speak of ritual significance, symbolic meaning, possible connections to fertility cults or ancestor worship. What they don't address is the strangest detail of all. Analysis of the cattle bones reveals they came from animals in their prime, healthy specimens between 3 and 7 years old. Not old livestock being culled, not sick animals being put down, the best of the herd offered to something these people believed demanded their finest experience. And always, without exception, deposited inside structures that pointed toward the same mysterious coordinates in the distance. I hiked for hours to reach a cluster of structures the Bedouin call the gates, low stone walls forming rough rectangles scattered across the highlands like fallen dominoes. Some are tiny, barely 2 meters across. Others span 500 meters. They don't enclose anything. They don't protect anything. And yet someone invested immense labor building thousands of them. Recent dating puts them at 9,000 years old, making them among the oldest human constructions on Earth. But I noticed something the papers don't mention. Many gates are built directly on top of older gates, layer upon layer, as if each generation needed to rebuild what came before. The first gate I examined sat on a ridge overlooking the Heret Uwairid lava field. 4 low walls arranged in a rectangle, roughly 30 meters long and 20 wide. The walls stood no higher than my knee, constructed from loose basalt chunks that could be pushed over with minimal effort. No entrance broke the perimeter. No internal features suggested habitation. From above, it looked like a picture frame placed on the desert floor, containing nothing but sand and scattered pebbles. I walked the interior, checking for artifacts, excavation pits, any sign of archaeological investigation. The ground showed subtle disturbances where researchers had conducted test trenches, small exploratory cuts to establish dating and function. But no major excavation had occurred here. The site remained largely untouched since its builders abandoned it 9 millennia ago. I sat on the northern wall and tried to understand the purpose. Gates imply passage. They mark transitions between spaces, boundaries between territories, thresholds between states of being. But these structures didn't block movement. You could step over the walls as easily as walking around them. They didn't control access to resources. Most sat in areas devoid of water, game, or useful materials. They didn't mark burial sites. Ground-penetrating radar surveys found no human remains beneath or near the structures. What troubled me most was the distribution pattern. Gates cluster in specific regions, sometimes dozens within a few square kilometers, then nothing for vast stretches of desert. The concentrations don't correlate with ancient water sources or migration routes. They don't follow terrain features that would make travel easier. Instead, they appear almost random, scattered across the landscape according to logic that remains invisible to modern analysis. But when I pulled out my satellite maps and compared gate locations to mustatil positions, a pattern emerged. Many gate clusters sit along the bearing lines I'd traced from the oriented monuments. Not at the convergence points, but along the paths between them, as if marking waypoints on a journey. I marked 17 gates that fell within 100 meters of the extended alignment. The probability of random distribution placing that many structures on the same narrow corridor seemed impossibly small. I examined the walls more carefully, looking for construction details that might reveal chronology or purpose. That's when I noticed the layering. Beneath the visible wall ran another course of stones, slightly different in weathering and placement. I carefully moved aside the upper rocks and found a third layer below that. 4 distinct construction phases, each one rebuilding the structure in almost exactly the same footprint. Why would successive generations invest labor maintaining boundaries that bounded nothing? Unless the boundaries themselves were never the point. Unless these gates marked something we can't see anymore. Something that required constant renewal to keep visible across the centuries. Something they desperately needed future generations to remember. Back in my tent, I pulled up the aerial surveys, and the desert transformed. What looks like random rubble from the ground becomes clear geometry from space. Circles within circles, radiating lines, parallel walls spanning entire valleys. The structures form networks, connected by ancient pathways, now invisible to the naked eye. I traced one pathway for 80 kilometers. It linked 6 mustatils, 14 kites, and 30 gates. This wasn't scattered activity. This was infrastructure, a prehistoric system built across a landscape we thought was empty. But infrastructure implies organization, planning, coordination. It implies something more than nomadic tribes. The revelation came at 3 a.m, laptop screen glowing in the darkness of my field tent. I'd been overlaying different data sets, trying to find correlations between structure types and landscape features, topographic maps, geological surveys, ancient lake bed positions, satellite imagery from multiple sources and seasons. The work was tedious, cross-referencing coordinates and adjusting for projection errors, but then I toggled on the complete structural database, every known mustatil, kite, and gate in the region, and the screen filled with patterns of this. Lines emerged first. Walls that appeared isolated on the ground revealed themselves as segments of much longer constructions, pathways that stretched for dozens of kilometers across terrain that seemed impassable. I followed one track from the highlands near Tabuk down into the Nafud Basin. 73 individual stone markers lined the route, each one positioned at intervals that averaged just over 1 kilometer. The precision was startling. Whoever placed these markers maintained consistent spacing across changing elevation and substrate, threading through lava fields and sand seas while keeping the pathway straight. But the pathways were just the beginning. When I zoomed out further, larger patterns appeared. Clusters of structures formed geometric shapes, triangles and polygons with sides measuring 10 to 15 kilometers. Some arrangements created perfect equilateral triangles, their vertices marked by major mustatil complexes. Others formed irregular shapes that nonetheless showed clear intentionality, angles and proportions that repeated across different locations. I spent hours mapping these megastructures, tracing their outlines and measuring their dimensions. One formation near the Jordanian border covered over 400 square kilometers, its perimeter defined by 27 mustatils and countless smaller gates. The interior space contained dozens of kites arranged in what looked almost like a grid pattern, though erosion and incomplete surveys made exact layouts difficult to confirm. The scale was breathtaking. This wasn't a hunting ground or a ritual site. This was territorial organization on a level that suggested central planning and sustained coordination. I pulled up research papers on other prehistoric monument complexes, Stonehenge and its surrounding landscape, the Nazca Lines in Peru, Poverty Point in Louisiana. All showed evidence of societies organizing labor and resources to create structures whose purposes extended beyond immediate practical needs. But those sites were products of societies we know about, cultures with identifiable pottery, tools, settlements. The Arabian structures predated all of them, built by people who left almost no trace beyond the monuments themselves. The thought that kept me awake wasn't just about the engineering capability required to build this network, it was about the information technology. Creating patterns visible only from altitude requires an ability to conceptualize and execute plans across scales far larger than human perception. You can't see these geometric arrangements from the ground. You can't verify your spacing or alignment without some method of measuring and communicating across kilometers. Yet somehow, 9,000 years ago, people accomplished exactly that, and left us wondering what else they could see that we've forgotten how to look for. I found my first obsidian shard near a collapsed kite wall. Black volcanic glass that doesn't occur naturally in this region. Chemical analysis traced it to outcrops 400 kilometers away. In the highlands of Yemen, someone carried this stone across the desert 8,000 years ago. But they weren't alone. Excavations have uncovered Red Sea shells in inland mustatils, Levantine flint near desert gates, and copper ore from Oman beside cattle deposits. These people were connected. They traveled, they traded. They moved resources across distances that would take weeks on foot. So why do we know nothing about them? The obsidian caught the morning light like a fragment of midnight, its edges still sharp enough to cut after millennia buried in sand. I turned it over in my palm, feeling the weight and texture. Volcanic glass forms when lava cools rapidly, creating a material prized by ancient peoples for its ability to hold an edge far superior to common stone. But obsidian sources are geographically limited. Each deposit has a unique chemical signature, a fingerprint that allows archaeologists to trace artifacts back to their origins. I sent samples to a lab in Heidelberg specializing in obsidian provenance analysis. The results came back 3 weeks later with coordinates that surprised the researchers. The glass originated from volcanic flows in the Yemen highlands, specifically from deposits near the ancient site of Marib. The distance from that source to where I found the shard measured 420 kilometers as the crow flies. On foot, accounting for terrain and the need to carry water, the journey would have taken at least 3 weeks. But this wasn't an isolated find. A comprehensive review of excavation reports revealed a pattern of long-distance material movement that contradicted everything we thought we knew about Neolithic mobility in Arabia. Red Sea cowrie shells turned up in mustatils 150 kilometers from the coast. Flint tools made from stone native to the Levant appeared in sites scattered across the Harat. Copper ore, likely from Omani sources, showed up as small ornaments and pigments in ritual deposits. The implications were significant. These materials weren't arriving through gradual drift. Objects passed hand to hand over generations until they reached distant locations. The quantities were too large, the distributions too widespread. Someone was actively transporting goods across the Arabian Peninsula, establishing trade networks or pilgrimage routes that connected coastal regions to interior deserts, highland sources to lowland settlements. I mapped the material sources and distribution patterns, looking for corridors of movement. The picture that emerged suggested a sophisticated understanding of Arabian geography. Trade routes followed ancient watercourses, even ones that had dried up by the time the structures were built, as if traders knew where seasonal rains might still provide water. Obsidian concentrations marked nodes where multiple pathways intersected, possible gathering points or exchange locations. What fascinated me most was the organization required. Moving obsidian from Yemen to northern Arabia wasn't a casual undertaking. Someone had to know where the source was, travel there to obtain the material, and transport it back across hundreds of kilometers of increasingly arid landscape. The same logic applied to shells, copper, and specialized flint. This required planning, coordination, and probably groups of people dedicated to maintaining these long-distance connections. But here's what doesn't fit the standard narrative. Nomadic pastoralists, the people we assume built these structures, don't typically invest in long-distance trade networks. They move with their herds, following seasonal resources, not hauling volcanic glass across deserts. The archaeological evidence suggests something more complex. A society with the resources and motivation to connect distant regions into a unified cultural sphere. Tucked in a canyon near Al-Ula, I found markings, faint, shallow grooves etched into a mustatil's capstone, nearly erased by centuries of wind. They weren't Arabic. They weren't Thamudic. They weren't anything I could recognize. Circular shapes surrounded a central motif that looked almost like a sun, or perhaps an eye. I photographed them from every angle, backlit them with a lantern, and traced the outlines with chalk to capture whatever detail time had spared. Back at camp, I sent the images to specialists across 3 continents. Epigraphers, linguists, and rock art experts examined them, searching for parallels in known proto-writing systems. The responses trickled back over 2 weeks. None matched. The closest resemblance, one researcher in Germany noted, was to abstract geometric rock art found in Yemen and Oman, dated to roughly the same period. But even those shared only superficial similarities. He called them non-linguistic symbol clusters, meaning they might have represented ideas rather than phonetic sounds. It was a careful way of saying, we have no idea. On the 3rd evening, while reviewing the images in low light, I noticed something new. The carving on the capstone wasn't isolated. Fainter marks extended across the adjacent stones, forming a continuous band of inscriptions that wrapped around the entire platform. Thousands of small peck marks arranged in looping sequences, spirals, intersecting lines. Some repeated patterns exactly, almost like text written in verses. Whatever this was, it wasn't random decoration. It carried structure, rhythm. The next morning, under softer dawn light, I began cataloging every motif. Circles enclosing dots, triangular clusters pointing upward, a repeated motif of 3 horizontal lines intersected by a vertical stroke, each perfectly spaced. When I laid them out on my tablet as vector tracings, the pattern reminded me of star maps, dense constellations rendered as symbolic geometry. But even that comparison felt incomplete, like I was seeing the residue of meanings that no longer have equivalence in our understanding. Some archaeologists would classify these engravings as prehistoric symbolism, art produced during the transition from foraging to pastoral societies. Yet the precision disturbed that label. The markings weren't art in the expressive sense. They were records. Not of words, perhaps, but of relationships between events, between places, between people and their landscape. The more time I spent tracing them, the more a peculiar feeling crept over me that these stones weren't carved to be seen by humans at all. That's a dangerous thought in archaeology. We analyze everything through human function. But here, on these quiet desert stones, the arrangement seemed to serve something else. Some ritual of recording not meant for human reading, only human performance. The makers might have carved them not to communicate outward, but upward, toward whatever force they believed watched and remembered beyond time. One of the epigraphers pointed out an odd linguistic echo. On several stones, the circular symbols form a sequential chain that resembles the earliest known Proto-Sinaitic glyphs, developed several millennia later and hundreds of kilometers away. Could this mean these engravings influenced later writing systems, or were both born from a deeper, more ancient symbolic tradition that stretched across the Near East before alphabets emerged? The academic world isn't ready to connect those dots, but the suspicion lingers. As I packed my gear, the evening wind sweeping through the canyon, I couldn't shake the impression that the stone itself had tried to remember something long after its makers vanished. Every groove, every shallow spiral seemed less like language and more like memory. A fossilized thought that never made the jump into speech, waiting, even now, for translation. The question remained echoing through the canyon walls as I left. If these symbols were the language of memory itself, then what memory were they protecting from oblivion? The first time I saw them, I thought I was looking at roads, ancient pathways carved into the desert by time and wind. But as the drone climbed higher above the dunes of Jebel Zilliyat, the shapes came into focus. Circles, triangles, keys, crossed lines stretching hundreds of meters. They weren't roads, they were geoglyphs, carved patterns pressed into the bones of the landscape. Some measured nearly a kilometer across, yet from the ground you'd never know they existed. These were messages written for eyes that could see from above. Jebel Zilliyat lies in the far north of Saudi Arabia, where the desert meets the horizon in waves of ochre and gold. Few travelers come here. There are no roads, no settlements, only dunes and silent mazes that rise like broken teeth from the earth. Archaeologists stumbled upon the site during a remote sensing survey in 2019. What they found changed everything they thought they knew about ancient Arabia. Hundreds of geometric patterns, visible only through satellite imagery, spread across an area larger than some countries. I reviewed those satellite photos for days, studying each formation. The circles came first, perfect even after 8,000 years of weathering. Then the triangles, some pointing uphill, others toward low valleys where water might once have pooled. The key shapes intrigued me most. Broad rectangles topped with curved ends like ancient locks waiting to be turned. The surfaces weren't carved through excavation or chiseling. Instead, their builders cleared away dark surface stones to reveal lighter sediment below, creating contrast that turned the entire ground into a living canvas. When I finally stood within one, the illusion dissolved. From where I stood, it was meaningless geometry, stripped of scale. I could touch only a few stones at a time, see only fragments of the pattern. But as my drone rose above me, the image reappeared, elegant and deliberate. Whoever made these designs understood perspective, an understanding of how to create meaning visible only from the sky. Yet flight was impossible then. The only vantage points would have been nearby cliffs, rising just high enough to trace outlines. Why make such effort for something no one could see fully from the ground? Some scholars argue these shapes served as territorial markers, boundary symbols visible to travelers. Others propose astronomical alignments or ceremonial functions linked to ancient deities of the sky. But there's something broader about these glyphs. Their scale suggests communication, expression on a continental level, as if their makers were declaring their existence across the desert, not to neighbors but to time itself. The geometry repeats elsewhere, in Jordan, Egypt, and parts of Sudan. Always the same motifs, built on similar materials, spaced at similar distances. It hints at a shared culture, or at least a common symbolic language uniting peoples across thousands of kilometers. The idea unsettled historians who prefer isolated cultural developments. But the desert doesn't care for borders. 8,000 years ago, when rain still fell across Arabia, caravans and nomads could have traversed these routes freely, carrying stories, stones, and symbols with them. At dusk, the air cooled and I climbed the nearest mesa to watch the last light graze the glyphs. The patterns glowed faintly in the amber light, their lines soft but unmistakable. They had survived centuries of wind and burial, resurfacing now only because we learned to look from the sky, the very perspective their builders seemed to anticipate. It's as though they left a message for future eyes, knowing one day someone would decipher their design. And standing there, high above that silent desert, I began to suspect that the people who carved these geoglyphs might have understood the heavens and our place beneath them far better than we do today. At dawn, the drone hovered over a ridge near Al-Jawf, and the image that appeared on my screen jolted me awake. Suspended on the desert plain lay what archaeologists call pendants, elongated stone rings with a circular enclosure at one end and a tapering tail stretching away like a comet's trail. From above, they resemble necklaces laid down by giants. Thousands of them lie scattered across northern Arabia, silent markers linked by invisible geometry. Yet most of these pendants are tombs, or they were supposed to be, because the ones I investigated contained no bodies at all. I stood beside one ring, its outer wall built from basalt blocks stacked waist high. Sand had nearly filled the interior, leaving only the faint suggestion of what might once have been a chamber. The circular head measured 12 meters across. The tail extended another 20 into the desert, pointing toward nothing. Excavations at similar sites have revealed stone platforms or central pits that archaeologists interpret as burial spaces. But at Al-Jawf, every test trench came up empty. No bones, no grave goods. Only fragments of charcoal and a few worked stones lying as if placed deliberately. That absence felt deliberate. Death leaves traces. Teeth, bone, remnants of linen or offering vessels, these had none. It was as if they commemorated the dead without containing them, cenotaphs to lives remembered elsewhere. The pendant shapes repeat with eerie precision across vast distances, thousands of structures mirroring the same form, aligned in groups that stretch along ancient wadis and basalt ridges. Their tails point consistently toward the southwest, often in the direction of mountain ranges that once held perennial lakes and basalt ridges. I pulled up earlier studies conducted by the Aerial Archaeology in Saudi Arabia project. Their data revealed something astonishing. Pendants occur in clusters connected to the same networks as mustatils and kites. The monuments formed part of a single monumental landscape, built by the same hands or by related cultures. Within these clusters, researchers had identified over 100 pendants containing human remains, often individuals buried with animal bones or stone tools. Standing amidst one such cluster under the noon sun, I couldn't help feeling that these empty rings were more than tombs. Perhaps they marked the places where those people expected to return, or perhaps they marked the absence itself, the unburied, the lost, the travelers who vanished in the search for better lands when the rains began to fail. To the people who built them, memory might have mattered more than presence. I followed the alignment of the tails using GPS. They led in staggered lines toward the foothills of Jebel Korma, vanishing into black volcanic fields. From the air, the lines of pendants almost looked like a procession, an endless caravan marching toward the horizon. If the buried were meant to journey, this was their path. But if they were never here to begin with, these stones might represent an older concept entirely, one in which monuments existed not to shelter the dead, but to tether the spirit to the land itself. Something curious added weight to that thought. Many pendants share their orientation with the mustatils I had mapped weeks earlier, the same northeast-southwest bias that defied purely astronomical alignment. It felt as though all these monuments, mustatils, kites, gates, and pendants, were chapters of a single architectural message written over millennia. As evening shadows lengthened, the ring at my feet glowed warm against the fading light. The silence deepened, carrying a strange calm. These were memorials, yes, but memorials to what? To those who died here, or to something far older that died within them. The green world that once fed their herds, the rivers that once carved life into the desert. The pendants without bodies seemed to whisper that remembrance can outlast presence, and perhaps that was their purpose, to make sure that even when the people were gone, the desert would still remember their shapes. By the time I reached the Harat Karamat Plateau, one question refused to leave me. Could herders moving with their flocks across a shifting landscape have really built all this? Thousands of mustatils, networks of kites, towers, pendants, geoglyphs stretching farther than sight. Every academic paper called the builders Neolithic pastoralists, as though that label explained anything. But the sheer scale of these monuments defied the image of small herding bands wandering the desert. Pastoralists, by definition, move with the seasons. They range widely, following rain and grazing. Their camps leave faint archaeological traces: hearths, animal bones, stone flakes, the occasional post hole. Yet the monument builders of ancient Arabia left behind enduring architecture, stone walls, precision alignments, and projects requiring months, even years of sustained labor. You can't do both. I hiked north across a basalt ridge where dozens of mustatils clustered together. Each wall had required hauling heavy rocks from kilometers away, shaping them to fit tightly without mortar. That meant organized transport lines, planning, and leadership to coordinate hundreds of workers. To call them nomads felt like calling cathedral builders carpenters camping in fields. The evidence pointed not to small pastoral families, but to complex communities rooted deeply enough to orchestrate long-term projects across vast territories. Archaeologists often rely on analogies. They study pastoral traditions in modern Arabia or Africa and project those models backward in time. But the Neolithic world was different. The climate was wetter. Lakes shimmered across what is now sand. Grasslands fed domesticated cattle, goats, and sheep. Maybe those pastures allowed people to stay longer in one place. Maybe abundance granted them the time to dream in stone. Even so, coordinating thousands of similar structures over an area larger than Mesopotamia demands more than local organization. It suggests shared ideology, perhaps even governance. I sat among the ruins at midday, watching thermal mirages shimmer on the horizon, and tried to imagine the logistics. Someone had to decide where each monument went. Someone had to design its dimensions, assign workers, manage supplies. That requires communication and authority. Who held that power? And where are their settlements, the permanent centers that should have supported such wide networks? Archaeologists have yet to find any major contemporaneous towns in northern Arabia. The people appear only through the stones they stacked, then vanish again into the sand. That absence is uncomfortable. It pushes researchers to fit the evidence into categories that feel safe. Nomadic ritual specialists, herding cult communities. Each explanation preserves the picture of simple societies performing symbolic acts. But when I stood atop one surviving wall, gazing across identical structures scattered to the horizon, symbolic felt inadequate. This was infrastructure, something continuous, deliberate, planned. Across generations, perhaps these people weren't pastoralists in the way we understand. Perhaps mobility didn't mean impermanence. The green Arabia of 8,000 years ago could have supported pastoral cities, migratory centers that moved slowly across the landscape, maintaining traditions and alliances through stone markers instead of writing. Their monuments might have anchored identity, turning territory itself into a living archive. The further I traveled, the clearer it became that the pastoralist problem isn't about herders at all. It's about our illusion that complexity requires cities, writing, and kings. The desert tells a quieter story, one of communities who organized without hierarchies, built without metal, remembered without text. As the light began to fade, shadows stretched from the mustatils like sundials, marking the language of time itself. Whoever these people were, they understood something we've lost. The strength of a memory carved into silence, so strong it endured even when its builders' names were erased by sand. And if pastoralists didn't build these structures alone, then who did? Late one night in Riyadh, a local historian shared a theory he refused to publish. He called it the theory of collective memory. In his words, the monuments scattered across Arabia weren't built merely to serve gods or tribes. They were built to preserve memory itself. Each mustatil, every kite, and each pendant was a memory anchor, a physical expression of something the builders didn't want time to erase. He leaned closer across the cafe table, his voice barely rising above the hum of traffic outside, and said, "They carved their remembrance into the land because they had no other way to write." The idea struck me as audacious, but strangely plausible. If these structures were never entirely practical, if their functions as traps or tombs only told part of the story, then perhaps their true role was mnemonic. When a people has no script, no permanent settlements, and no recorded history, how do they ensure the continuity of knowledge beyond living memory? They turn landscape into memory. They transform stone into a language of presence. In that sense, each monument becomes more than structure. It becomes a story encoded in geometry. The layout, the orientation, the relationship with the stars, with water, with other monuments. Their configurations might represent lineage, seasons, migrations, or cosmic cycles. Perhaps each generation rebuilt what the previous had left, not to innovate, but to remember. The layering of gates, the alignment of mustatils, the copied forms of pendants. Repetition becomes ritual. Anthropologists speak of distributed cognition, the idea that human thought extends into objects, spaces, and practices. This landscape might be the oldest example of that concept ever built. Instead of storing memory in words or carvings, Arabia's ancient builders stored it in architectures that spanned hundreds of kilometers, each monument a fragment of a larger archive inscribed across the desert. And just as digital data needs a system to read it, memory encoded in stone requires eyes that understand its grammar. Those eyes, it seems long because I tested the theory against evidence. The monument's alignments track specific corridors and angles that repeat across vast distances. Many lead toward ancient lakes now buried under shifting dunes. Could these have marked environmental changes, reminders of where water once flowed? Could they have served as geographic mnemonics, spatial histories remembered through pilgrimage? A society dependent on rainfall and grazing might have used collective rituals to fix these memories in place, ensuring future generations could navigate by them long after the lakes had dried. It also explains the simultaneous uniformity and variation. The builders copied the essential pattern, the mustatil form, the kite corridors, the pendant rings, but adapted each to its terrain, just as language adapts dialects while preserving root words. Over centuries, the monuments evolved as memory evolved, growing more abstract as meaning slipped from conscious recall into pure tradition. The historian's words echoed through my mind as we parted ways. Civilizations fall, he said, but memory tries to survive. He believed that all these monuments together were the last attempt of a civilization facing ecological collapse, a culture watching its world dry and vanish. By turning memory into stone, they ensured something of themselves would endure when even their voices failed. That thought followed me long after I left Riyadh. Under the stars, walking among ruins that now whisper only to the wind, I began to see the desert differently. Each wall, each ring, each alignment might not speak of gods or kings at all, but of a collective human act to remember, long after forgetting became inevitable. But if memory built these monuments, what catastrophe made them need remembering in the first place? Around 6,000 years ago, the rains stopped, slowly at first, then all at once. The Arabian Peninsula, once a tapestry of lakes, grasslands, and rivers, began to wither into the desert we know today. Lakes evaporated, herds migrated, forests turned to scrub. And along with the water went the people, the builders of mustatils and kites, the keepers of the cattle cults, the ones who carved the landscape with geometry. They vanished into silence, leaving only the stones as testimony. Archaeologists call it the end of the Holocene wet phase. The desert calls it the forgetting. I found the evidence of that ending in layers of sediment no thicker than a hand's breadth. Underneath the sands of Al-Khaybar lay residues of pollen, algae, and freshwater fauna, far older than any human presence. Above them, nothing but dust. No aquatic traces, no grass. Just desolation sealed in time. Radiocarbon dating fixed it around 4000 BCE, the exact period when construction of large mustatils abruptly ceased. It's as if someone turned off the sky. The climatic collapse wasn't subtle. In the space of a few centuries, wetlands retreated hundreds of kilometers. The reliable monsoons that once reached deep into the peninsula shifted southward, abandoning Arabia to wind. Rivers dried. Oases disappeared. The delicate balance that supported cattle herding and agriculture broke, forcing the people who remained to scatter or die. For them, climate wasn't an abstraction, it was fate. But the collapse of rainfall only tells part of the story. Remains from the last phase of mustatil use suggest something more than quiet abandonment. Fire scars trace across the interior walls of certain structures as if they were deliberately scorched before being deserted. Nearby sites show signs of abrupt burning followed by centuries of emptiness. At the Tema Basin, fragments of human bone mixed with debris hint at violence, perhaps conflict born from diminishing resources. If collective memory built these monuments, collective fear might have destroyed them. When I walked among those fire-blackened stones, the silence felt unnatural, too heavy to belong only to time. The wind carried no sound but its own whisper, no echo of life returning. I imagined the last generations here, watching their pastures fail, performing final rituals meant to appease heavens that no longer answered. Perhaps they dismantled their sacred spaces intentionally, closing chapters they feared would outlive them. In some mustatils, archaeological cores revealed deliberate backfilling. People carried stones from walls they had built over centuries and poured them back in, sealing the monument like a tomb. The historian's words return to me. Civilizations fall, memory tries to survive. What if these people knew their end was coming and chose not to flee, but to encode their entire history in stone? Their monuments might be the last coherent message from a world that drowned in sand rather than sea. The desert's geometry, the cattle offerings, the obsidian trails, even the empty pendants, all fragments of a ritual farewell written across a dying land. By the time the climate stabilized again, centuries later, Arabia was unrecognizable. Nomads roamed the skeleton of a forgotten civilization, repurposing its stones without knowing whose hands had shaped them. The rain that once carved rivers now carved memory instead, eroding human names from history. As I stood on a ridge overlooking a barren plain where lakes once shimmered, the setting sun turned the sand blood red. The air tasted of dust and endings. The desert had finally reclaimed its secret. Yet beneath its surface, untouched, lies the record of that cataclysm, a silent warning inscribed in geology. It reminds us that the line between flourishing and forgetting is thinner than a layer of dust, and that even the greatest builders of memory can be buried by what they failed to see coming. Last night, I camped alone among the ruins of Herat Khaibar. The wind pressed through the stones like breath beneath a closed door. Even after weeks of fieldwork, the stillness of this place feels alive, as though the desert itself is listening. I built no fire. I wanted the darkness to speak, and it did, softly, through the sigh of shifting sand and the low groan of rock cooling after the heat. It is in moments like this that I begin to understand what the desert remembers and what it chooses to forget. From the air, these monuments seem scattered, lines, circles, and rectangles adrift in endless emptiness. But when you move among them, the illusion dissolves. The mustatils lead to the kites, the gates connect to the pendants. Every structure whispers to the next. They are part of a single story stretched across time, a message inscribed not in language, but in persistence. No walls still stand whole, and yet their patterns remain. The arrangement itself, still visible from orbit, means that their builders succeeded. They wanted to be remembered. They still are. I've come to realize that memory, in this landscape, is not just a human act. The desert remembers through its geology, grinding every century into dust, but keeping the stories buried within. The soil traps pollen from vanished lakes. The stones preserve charcoal from vanished fires. Every particle holds a record of the living. Time erases the form, but not the fact. What we call archaeology is simply the act of listening carefully enough to hear the earth recall its own past. At sunrise, I walked to the edge of a ridge overlooking a chain of ancient pathways, tracks first carved by herds, then sealed beneath millennia of silence. From this height, the horizon glowed faintly gold, and for a moment, I imagined the green world that once was. Rivers running between basalt hills, herds of cattle grazing near shallow lakes, people gathering under a humid sky to shape stone into symmetry. The image vanished with the growing light, but the echo of it remained. For every footprint erased, the desert had left a trace in its place, carved not into sand, but into consciousness. As we mapped the last alignment before returning to Riyadh, one of the local guides said something that stayed with me. He pointed toward the wide plain shimmering in heat and said, "The desert never truly forgets who walked it. It just waits for them to return." I didn't answer at the time, but that sentence keeps repeating now, as I write beneath a canopy of stars older than the carvings themselves. Perhaps the waiting is the point. The monuments may not call to gods or spirits, they may call to us, to remind us that memory and loss are inseparable. That, to be forgotten, is never total so long as anyone still looks and wonders. Soon I'll leave this place, closing another chapter of the expedition. Yet I know I'll keep feeling it. The pull of those invisible lines stretching through dunes. The sense that the stones are still speaking in a language we're barely beginning to recognize. The people who built these monuments are dust now, but their geometry survives, an unbroken thought resting quietly beneath the stars. Because the desert, for all its silence, remembers everything. It remembers the rains that once fell here, the hands that built its patterns, the voices that sang to a sky now mute. And perhaps, when the wind moves just right, it even remembers us, travelers trying to understand a memory far older than our species, written not for the living, but for the earth itself. Another piece of the puzzle, another secret swallowed by the ages. Every expedition ends the same way, with more questions than answers. As I pack away my notes and seal another sample bag, I realize that the real discovery here isn't just about ancient Arabia or its forgotten architects. It's about how fragile memory truly is, and how fiercely human beings fight to keep it alive. The people who built these monuments carved their stories into stone because they understood what we too often forget. Sand erases footsteps, but not intention. When I first arrived, I thought I was chasing ruins. Now, I think I was chasing voices. Each mustatil and kite is a sentence in a language we no longer speak. Each gate, a phrase paused mid-thought. Together, they form a record of human existence in its purest form, the need to be known, even after disappearing. The desert may have taken their lakes, their homes, their very names, but it could not silence their pattern. In the quiet hours beneath the Arabian stars, I began to feel that these builders weren't trying to leave behind monuments at all. They were trying to leave behind continuity, a thread from their world to ours. And in uncovering their work, we have become part of that continuity. We have stepped into the very story they built to remind us who we were when the world was new. Perhaps that's what exploration is really about. Not finding answers, but remembering what questions are worth asking. Each line we trace in the sand, each excavation we complete, is another attempt to hear the past breathe again. The stones whisper that history doesn't vanish. It only waits, buried just deep enough to test our curiosity and our care. As the wind moves through the ruins one last time, I close my notebook. Somewhere out there, beneath shifting dunes and forgotten walls, the next piece of the map is waiting. And when we find it, it will remind us once more that history does not whisper, it waits.